Canyon has just launched the brand new, totally redesigned Lux, which is the German consumer direct brand's full suspension cross-country platform. The Lux was last updated way back in 2014, and apart from the fact it's still 100mm travel, full suspension XC platform, the new bike shares very little with that old model. Starting with the most obvious visual change, the bike has now adopted what Canyon calls its flat shock arrangement, which is essentially putting the shock along the underside of the top tube. Critically, for an XC bike, this allows you to store two 800ml bottles inside the frame. There's a number of bikes in the full suspension XC category which allow you to take two bottles, but it's still quite a rare thing and something that's really worth considering, particularly if you're doing longer rides or longer marathon style races. The new layout is also claimed to transmit lower stresses into the frame compared to the old vertically mounted rocker activated shock on the old bike. Canyon has also adopted its triple phase suspension curve with the new Lux, which is essentially a fancy marketing way of saying that bike tester's favourite, of describing a bike which is supple off the top, supportive in the mid-stroke and ramps up nicely towards the end. Starting with the rocker, this is now made of two cast alloy sections which are joined with a steel bridge. A full alloy construction would be lighter, but that steel bridge is just that little bit stiffer and it makes the most of the small space on offer. And Canyon claims that with that stiffer rear end that's provided by the rocker, you get better suspension performance, particularly towards the end of the travel. Like the old Lux, the rear triangle is still pivotless. However, the seat stays are now formed in such a way that when the bike is static and unweighted, those seat stays are in tension, but when the bike is weighted for sag, they're supposed to sit in a kind of like more neutral way, which is claimed to again provide better suspension performance, but also just put less stress on the seat stays, so longevity should in theory be better. They've also tuned in a little bit more anti-squat in order to improve pedaling efficiency. In quite an uncharacteristic move for Canyon and generally speaking German direct sale brands, the new Lux is one-by specific. This isn't a move just to antagonise commenters on YouTube, and there is actually rationale behind it. Primarily, building the bike around a single chainring has allowed them to optimise bearing placement around the lower pivot, placing the bearings further apart, because obviously you don't have to worry about that inner chainring, which has allowed Canyon to use smaller bearings overall, which of course saves a little bit of weight while improving stiffness all at the same time. The other benefit, and the one I think is most interesting, is that by designing the bike around a single chainring, you're able to optimise that anti-squat with less compromises than would be required with a double setup. The Lux is designed for a 34 to 38 tooth chainring range, and although it will work with a 30 and 32, it will work best with those ones. So the philosophy is that by designing the kinematics to work with that very specific range of chainrings, in this case 34 to 38 on the Lux, you're able to design the anti-squat to perform best without any compromises. With a double setup, you can have such a wide range from minuscule inner chain rings to pretty large outers, and you would end up with a performance which was sort of middling in terms of the anti-squat. So I think this is quite an interesting move and something we've not really heard other people talk about too much before. You can of course choose to run a 30 or a 32 if you want, if you've got weak legs, but it will also result in a 5 to 10% loss in the anti-squat according to Canyon. All of the complete bikes will ship with flat mount brakes, but it does also come with an adapter, which means that post-mount brakes will also work with the bike. The geometry doesn't present anything particularly radical for an XC bike. The bike has a 70-degree head angle, 74.5 seat angle, and comes with a 455mm reach. These are fairly conservative numbers, and they're not going to set the world alight. Something that is quite interesting is if you compare these to the XC hardtail. This isn't going to be a consideration for most people, but Canyon has actually made sure that the fit between the XC and the new Lux is identical. And to do this, they've actually steepened the head and seat angle on the new Lux by half a degree. This means that when the bike is in sag, everything slackens out that little bit, and then at that point, they're going to have the same fit. How much of a consideration this is going to be for the majority of buyers is questionable, but I'm sure for the Albinator, he'll be delighted. There's all sorts of funky little details that you can read about in our full write-up with the link in the description. But one thing I would like to talk about is the cool little chain guide which is integrated into that lower pivot bolt. This is actually kind of, I would describe as pleasingly crude. It's literally just a piece of L-shaped alloy which bolts onto that bolt and rotates around to adjust for chainring size. And that's all it needs to be. XC racers are notoriously weight conscious, and I think this is the most minimalist chain guide I've ever seen, and I actually really like it. The range starts at €2,600 for a SRAM NX build with a Reba fork, rising to a heady €6,000 for a bike which is built around the new Shimano XTR group set, the Fox Stepcast 32, factory fork, and all manner of all the fancy XC carbon goodness you could ever wish for. As you'd expect of Canyon, there's both SRAM and Shimano equipped bikes available, and there's something quite unusual about the SRAM equipped bikes, but we'll get onto that later. For those of you itching to know, the cheapest bike in a size medium comes in at 11.8 kilos, with the very most expensive bike coming in at 10 kilos. Those are claimed weights, yes. I forgot my scales, I'm very sorry, but Canyon is normally quite good with claimed weights, so you can take those with less of a pinch of salt than usual. I've had a chance to ride the new bike, and in this case it was the typically word salady Lux CF SLX 9.0 Pro Race. This bike is built around a top-end SRAM XX1 Eagle group set, a RockShox SID World Cup fork, Reynolds Black Edition carbon wheels, fancy carbon bars from Canyon, and all manner of other loveliness. Pretty much your dream bike if you're racing XC, with this particular bike coming in at €5,600. Before we even started riding the bikes, I was first put on a medium by Canyon, and looking at their geometry charts, my 6-foot frame should have put me on a medium, but honestly, it just didn't feel right. I felt like the bars were in my lap, and it's a much shorter bike than I've been used to riding. This isn't strictly a criticism of Canyon or their geometry charts, but it just proves that if you have a bike and you've kind of grown to like it, do pay attention to its geometry and make sure you compare it closely with the Lux if you're considering one. Canyon did put me on a size large in the end, and I have to say it did feel a lot better. Our ride started out with a bunch of big climbs, and the suspension performance is very good on fire roads and those kind of smaller bumps. Despite that claimed increase in anti-squat, it is actually quite active over small bumps, and I think for marathon races and those longer rides, that very active suspension would be very beneficial. Obviously coming in at 10 kilos, the bike is pretty light, though not the lightest, and it climbs very well overall. On slow speed, kind of tight, twisty, technical terrain, the bike feels very fun. It's kind of that typical XC ride where it's very fast, nimble, agile, and what you'd expect of an XC bike. But on steeper terrain, it does feel a little bit nervous. That 70-degree head angle is not that progressive, even by XC terms, and one thing that really holds the bike back in tougher terrain is those inexcusably narrow 720mm bars. Now to start, I've quipped on a number of occasions, but it's always possible to make a wider bar narrower, but you can't go the other way. I did speak to Canyon about this, and I do understand their position as a consumer direct brand. They don't really want their buyers taking a hacksaw to their brand new bike without the support of a bike shop. But with that said, in 2018, 720 bars would not be my choice. Not only do wider bars give you more confidence in technical terrain, but I also personally feel they improve my climbing. I found with the narrow bars, and this is probably more just a kind of habit thing than anything else, my climbing was a bit more kind of staccato, whereas with the wider bars I tend to do more gentle sweeps, and I just didn't really like the way it climbed on that steeper terrain with the narrow bars. Worse still, the SRAM equipped bikes come with grip shift. What a fun throwback, I'm sure you're all thinking right now, and for me, it was kind of that. It was a fun throwback. It was genuinely novel getting to use grip shift again and dump a whole cassette in one go. But novelty isn't a reason to buy something, and I think it really could be a deal breaker for some. Particularly with those narrow bars, you have to move your hands slightly inboard to use the grip shift, and it just makes that narrow bar effect just that little bit worse. I don't want to dwell on this too much, and I don't want to make people's minds up for them, but if you are committed to a SRAM bike, to not have a regular trigger shifter option strikes me as odd. However, in a nod to being a little bit more progressive, All of the bikes, save for the two cheapest, come with a 100mm travel dropper post, which is an amazing move for the world of XC. I personally think there's serious benefit to running a dropper post even on an XC bike, unless your course is just about having a crazy lightweight bike. But really, for that additional control that even a 100mm drop gives you is hugely beneficial in my eyes. Later in the afternoon, once we'd returned from our ride, I had a chance to go back and session some more wide open, very fast, very rugged terrain, the sort of stuff you might find in like a marathon race. And I have to say, in that sort of terrain, the bike is very, very capable. Particularly over those bigger hits, and we're hitting all sorts of fun little jumps and drops, it feels absolutely excellent. It copes with those big hits very well, it ramps up nicely towards the end of the stroke, and it does overall feel very good. Climbing back up that terrain, it's hard to attribute it to either the very narrow 2.2 Icon tyres and the wet conditions, or perhaps something to do with the suspension platform itself, but it was a little bit of a challenging climb, and I'd want to investigate a little bit more should I have more time to ride the bike soon. However, on fire roads and over small bumps, the bike feels very, very comfortable and very efficient, and at 10 kilos, it's certainly no heavyweight. The last Canyon launch I went on was for the Grail, which, as we all know, was a pretty wacky bike. So coming into the Lux, I was expecting to see something pretty left field, and truthfully, it's just a good XC bike. Now that sounds negative, but it's not necessarily that. For those considering buying the Lux, you're probably a pretty hardcore racer, and if you look overall at how Canyon has designed it, they've designed it to be a very easy to live with, low maintenance, and very fast, lightweight XC bike, and that's probably what you're after. So while it's maybe not pushing back the boundaries of what's possible with an XC bike, for those that are just looking for an all-out race machine that will work well for years to come, I have a feeling the Lux is very unlikely to disappoint. It's obviously too early to have formed a full opinion on the Lux, but you can keep an eye on this channel and BikeRadar.com, and in the meantime, don't forget to like or subscribe.
Dang, you cooked yourself, bro.